All right, all right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hey Coach Radio. In today's episode, we are interviewing exercise physiologist and natural bodybuilder Josh Bradshaw. I've also got my co-host, Coach Zach Richie, in the house. So first and foremost, guys, let's just go ahead and introduce ourselves, who we are, what we do, what we're passionate about. And since Josh is our guest, let's go ahead and do a brief introduction of yourself, Josh.
Appreciate it. And again, it's an honor to be on here. I'm a competitive natural bodybuilder, a physique coach as well. And then I co-coach with Chris Barakat at Competitive Breed. And we do research in strength, hypertrophy, bodybuilding, the whole 9 yards at the University of Tampa.
But go ahead, give us the rundown on yourself, Coach Zach.
Yeah. Obviously, William's a co-host here on the podcast Hey Coach Radio. Also work with the Educated Dieter, where we work with clients for body composition-based goals, hormone optimization, and really anything that come to us health-related that we can hopefully help them achieve those results. But yeah, I've been with Will here for a while now. And we're passionate about really just helping people achieve their goals, and with the podcast, getting out some helpful information to our listeners by bringing on guests like Josh, who know more than us in specific areas. So that's why we bring them on.
That's right. Specific areas. And specific.
and probably a lot of areas. We've been following you for a long time, and not only do you get your clients excellent results and give us information that we've talked about plenty of times on the podcast, but even personally with your own success in the sport, it's very it's awesome to watch, and be a part of your journey here, and hopefully learn something from you today.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and just do a brief kind of wrap up. What's been going on with you guys for the last week? Obviously, I know we have lives outside of being a coach, right? Whatever that is, maybe it's with your bodybuilding journeys, maybe it's some strength PRs you're breaking in the gym, maybe it's some research that you're working on right now. Josh, what are you passionate about and excited about right now that you've been working on?
Well, like we discussed off air, wrapping up an off season for next competitive season coming up here soon. But the main thing, I guess the biggest new thing that I've been doing lately is putting out just longer form content. And that's been in the form of these lectures, video presentations, whatever you want to call them, very informal, but for me, it seems like a much more appropriate platform to really dive into a topic. It's like the School of Gains course that Zach, you took. There's only so much that you can say on social media, right? And there's, with caption limits and, what gets clicks and, just the move towards shorter form content. And every single time I post something, I'm always like, okay, what do I have to leave out with this caption? Like, what has to go? I'll draft something up, and almost every single time it's like something has to go. And okay, well, you can only dive into so much detail with this. And so figured, why not just hop on, record a lecture going over the topic and give it the detail that it really deserves and the nuance for the people who really care about it. And so that's been very fruitful, and I've had a lot of fun doing it.
The free info you guys are putting out is awesome, but I will say, just as a past student of your guys' course, you and Chris, definitely it's worth the money. So anybody interested in an excellent course to bring your education to the next level in regards to, strength training or body composition, based goals and things like that, just training in general, it's definitely a course worth taking.
From a content creation perspective, I absolutely agree. I think right now in the landscape of social media, we're dealing with so much of just a watered down version of what it truly is, almost in a sense, making it way too simple, right? And if you truly understand exercise physiology and nutritional science, it's nice to simplify, but you also can't over grossly simplify, because then you miss very important nuance that can make a big difference at the end of the day. So I actually didn't know this, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to kick the podcast off now. I actually didn't know this, but you were actually a athlete. I heard a baseball player, and that's how you ended up at the University of Tampa. And then you got your foot into the exercise physiology room. How did that happen, man?
Yeah, this is something I don't get asked very often. But I grew up playing baseball. It was like my first passion. I played from the ages 4 to 19, and basically stopped like right as I got to Tampa. So played, for a good bit of my life at that point, and parting ways with it was very difficult. Fortunately, going through high school, we had a really, really good strength and conditioning coach, and he had a master's from UCLA. I believe it was UCLA. And I had originally gotten into lifting weights just as a means to being a better athlete. I cared more about hitting a baseball as hard as I could, more so than training. Training was like, okay, how am I going to improve at this? But eventually that kind of shifted over time. So we go into the gym, and our coach hands us these printed out spreadsheets, and it's really, really well thought out. Like the off season was split up into 2 mesocycles. There was a daily undulating periodization to
awesome.
it. It was like really, really put together with a lot of fine details.
Yeah, especially for high school. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was, way ahead of, where most high schoolers would be.
Yeah.
And so I was like, whoa, like what is all this? And I had so many questions, and I just wanted to know the answer to like every little detail that was involved. So developed a good relationship with him over time. And long story short, my senior year, we were kind of finishing up, and we were talking about just plans afterwards, if I was going to continue playing or just what the academic route kind of looked like. And he was like, well, I know you're really, really interested in this just based on the conversations that we've had. So people study this stuff for a living. I don't know if that's something you want to pursue, but it is a career path. If you're really interested, you should look up Eric Cressy and Eric Helms. So both of those guys, very, very solid dudes with just the information that they put out.
Yep.
And so that was like my start, and just dove into their work. And so I was kind of already on my way to Tampa at the time, knowing, okay, that's what I want to study. So I'm going in, and, midway through undergrad, I'm kind of leaning towards physical therapy. Not sure if I want to pursue strength and conditioning, human performance. I met Chris at the gym that we and I actually met at the same gym. This was 2017. It was on his first contest prep, and I had no idea that he was teaching at UT at the time. We actually got there at the same time, but we didn't actually meet until a couple of years in. So we started talking about all of this stuff, bodybuilding. I know he was on prep. He asked me if I wanted to take part in research as an undergraduate student, and that was fall of 2017. And then the rest is kind of history.
Awesome. No kidding. That was actually Powerhouse North, right?
So that was the LA.
The LA Fitness on Dale Mabry.
Yeah.
Super cool. Super cool.
Where are you from originally, Josh?
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati. Okay. Awesome.
I think it's important to understand like where people's backgrounds, where they come from. Like as myself, Zach, and you, we're all athletes growing up, right? And that actually happened to lead us to the sport of bodybuilding. So obviously with you being in the exercise physiology department, kind of connecting with Chris, and then getting your own opportunities to begin to look into your own research. A study I wanted to talk about to kind of crank this podcast up is the July 2022 post that you made. And the study in and of itself was muscular adaptations following an 8-week or a myo rep set configuration versus traditional straight sets in resistance trained individuals. And the questions that I have for you are, being the actual exercise physiologist, like what did you expect was going to happen?
Yeah. So this has definitely been a long project that's been in the works for a really long period of time. We're actually, so that was the abstract we had submitted to that conference. We are at the final stages and kind of waiting on a couple faculty members to sign off on the last bit of edits before we submit for peer review. But we actually have 2 cohorts of studies. So that was the first cohort for the first 8 weeks, and then we collected more subjects to increase the sample size, and then we ran it again second semester. So it was, a full year. And so what we expected to find was a similar response, in that the rest pause data and the cluster set data would indicate a comparable response between, incomplete rest compared to traditional straight sets. So we knew that there hadn't been a study on myoreps, like specifically. It's slightly different than rest pause training. It's very, very similar, but it's really, really prevalent right now in the industry. So we wanted to look and see, okay, is this actually an equal comparison, and how many straight sets are required to kind of match that? Or, when somebody programs myoreps to kind of save time in the gym, like what might this be equated to from a stimulus standpoint? So essentially what we did, we took the original myorep design. There's several different iterations of it right now in the field. Not exactly sure why, but essentially what the original design entailed. So you have an activation set, which was traditional, just a normal straight set. And then you would rest for 30 to 40 seconds, depending on how many repetitions that you achieved in that activation set. That kind of dictated how many reps you would do in the clusters that followed. So if you got, what was it? It was if you landed somewhere between 6 to 8 reps, you would be doing clusters of 2. If you landed somewhere between 9 and 12 reps, you'd be doing clusters of 3. And if you landed somewhere between 13 and 16, it would be clusters of 4. We tried to keep them somewhere between that range, just to, standardize conditions as best as we could. So what you would do your activation set, you'd rack the weight, rest, not long enough to do another set, but roughly about 30 to 40 seconds. We decided on 40. You'd unrack the weight, and then you would perform the cluster sets to the repetition target. You would say it was 3 reps. You go down, do 3 reps, rack it, rest for 20 seconds, and then repeat that for as many times as you could until you were unable to reach that repetition target. So there was a huge auto-regulation component to it. So when you were feeling great, it allowed you to just continue on and accrue some more stimulus. When you weren't feeling as good, maybe you only got 1 or 2 clusters, which that certainly happened in many cases. So on the net, there was a big difference in total volume between the 2 conditions, but we didn't see a statistically significant difference between the 2 conditions. So there was a great deal of time saved in the experimental conditions. So the guys who were doing the myorep protocol were in and out in essentially 15 minutes. Whereas the traditional control group was roughly about 45 minutes. So we did this on the bench press, the incline press, and a seated cable fly. So again, the original hypothesis was we're probably going to see a comparable response between the 2 conditions. But what else is going to happen with strength, 1RM strength endurance? I hypothesized that we were going to see a greater increase in strength endurance in the myorep condition, just because on average, their greater percentage of their volume is coming from very, very slow reps. So I thought that we were going to see that kind of play out in the reps to failure test, but we didn't, which I thought was very interesting in and of itself. So yeah, basically equivocal outcomes, but one had a lot less volume and saved a lot more time. So the practical applications were, essentially, if you're short on time, this is a really, really good way to accrue, effectively 3 sets.
Absolutely. Was, just out of curiosity, how did you guys choose the working load? Was it based off of a percentage of the 1 rep max, or?
Yeah, so we tried our best to stray away from percentages, because there's oftentimes when you take somebody through, say what you would do in research is take them through a 1RM pre-testing.
Sure.
You would then take 70% of their 1 repetition max and have them take that load to failure and see how many reps they get. Not every study does that. A lot of studies have some sort of component of strength endurance to it. But what we find is with percentages, someone might get as few as 6, someone might get as many as 35. And so we try to stick somewhere between a 6 and 12 RM load. So whatever they got on that strength endurance test pre-intervention, kind of used that as a guide to kind of guess for that first week. Okay, roughly about, how many reps did they get on that pre-test, and then what's going to keep them under 12 reps. And then we kind of progressed from there. And then after that first week, it was, if they were above 12 reps, we would increase loads. So there was progressive overload built into the training.
Awesome. So with the findings in this data, where do you see the application of using such intensity techniques, such as your myo reps?
Yeah, so we did it on compound work, which was interesting because in my mind, unless you're a very skilled trainee, doing something where you're grinding out a lot of reps on a free weight compound, it can be problematic. We had 3 spotters for every subject, going through their presses.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see where that might be problematic. So in practice, as a coach, I pretty much exclusively use stable movements for that. So whether it be a machine press or just, an isolation exercise to save time. And it largely, again, depends on somebody's skill and how advanced they are.
Yeah.
So if somebody's really technically proficient, you can get away with stuff like that and you have a bit more flexibility. For somebody who's newer and doesn't have the skill, I certainly wouldn't want them ingraining bad habits because it's really easy to do so in those conditions.
This could be very useful for somebody that has a very limited time window to train, right? Even considering maybe somebody that's a parent or something and they don't have a lot of time. Maybe it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes or something, a lot less than the typical 75 to 90 minute bodybuilding style workout where every single minutia detail is accounted for and it's attempted to be perfect. You have a new skill that you could essentially implement. I remember a long time ago, what I began to implement with some of my clients was just the concept of this push-pull type of routine, right? Where you're supersetting a push, superset it with a pull, and then maybe an overhead press with a pull down, a bench press with a chest supported row, something like that to save time, but still get the amount of volume and the amount of stress on the physiology that you would need for an adaptation. So I think it's great to have these types of tools. And obviously that's really cool that you guys were able to find that kind of as a conclusive new opportunity for people that may not have a lot of time to train, which basically takes me into something that you and I talked about off camera that, you're realizing now kind of over the last few years is the idea or the concept of not falling into a trap of getting too dogmatic with training. Right. And I want you to just open up about whatever you've experienced and kind of where your mindset is at, even with you and Chris both being exercise physiologists and knowing this data better than just about anybody in the world. How has your training evolved and adapted over the last few years to basically get you to where you're at now?
Yeah. Oh man. How much time do you have?
We got time, brother.
Yeah. It's certainly been a huge learning experience. So, it's something that we see in the diet realm, really, really frequently. What's the best diet? Oh, keto's the best diet, right? No, it's paleo, right? Oh, I didn't see progress until I did keto, right? But they don't understand the principles behind it, right? It's not nothing magic behind intermittent fasting or keto. Is the fact that you subtracted an entire macro.
Still comes down to law of thermodynamics. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's you chose a method that best applied the principles given your circumstances. Same thing happens with training. So you kind of see this pendulum shift back and forth in the field. So if you rewind 5 to 10 years ago, it was all about the volume, right? Volume craze with these really, really, really high volume studies being published, right? We haven't seen the the ceiling of, how much volume, where does growth cap off, right? And so what happened was we get a lot of people moving towards, training with very, very high volumes, and they see things work because, it's something different. They haven't done that before. And they're truly convinced that this is the way to train, right? And so, if you have a loud enough voice or a big enough platform, you start putting out a lot of convincing information that say, hey, this is the way to train. And they honestly believe that because, they're experiencing a lot of progress. So around that time frame, I naturally, I wanted to be evidence-based, started bringing my volume up, and saw, a great deal of progress. And eventually it got, it took things too far. And that's kind of how things go in the field, right? You see a pendulum shift towards one end, and then it gets all the way to, way too far on an extreme side, and then it, slams back the other way, right? So took things a little bit too far, and I could see it in my training that my progress was stalled quite a bit. I remember hopping on a DEXA scanner. It was, I think, 13 months had passed since I had my last scan, and it said I had only gained, it was a little bit over a pound of lean mass. So, I mean, that, to be honest, that's within the range at which, the machine's percent error could be, dictating, oh, you just happen to be up. So there's a chance that you didn't grow at all.
Yeah, it could be maintaining. Yep.
So I'm like going nuts because I'm like, I followed all of the data, like what's going on. So like, okay, we got to do something different because I run like three mesocycles in a row where most of my compound lifts really didn't budge from a numerical strength standpoint. Okay. Like my 7 RM specifically, I remember this, on bench, the hack and the RDL were identical for, again, 16 weeks straight. Mm-hmm. Okay, wow. There's our issue. And so started pulling things down because, when you start training with a bunch of volume, you pace yourself. You can't take every single set to failure. You break. So started pulling things down, brought intensity up, and blew up. So that was the change between my 2019 comp and my 2021 comp. So you remember, what had gone on there. So I had taken volume down to like a moderate amount and saw a ton of progress. So again, in my mind, this is the way to train, right? So we got to keep moving things in that direction to continue making progress. So along with that, coincidentally, the field started to swing back towards, higher intensity, really low volumes, low rep ranges. And it started to kind of confirm my thought process. I had just done this myself, and now everybody else is kind of, going through this as well. So I've got to be on the right track here. So I take this, again, way too far. And my strength, my numbers on my top sets were, through the roof. But my volumes were essentially like 1 to 2 sets per exercise. And like my volume tolerance was like non-existent, maybe like 5 to 9 working sets in a single session, like for the entire session. And I was like gassed. And most of the reps didn't go over 8 for like everything. And I'm sure you guys have seen it in the field right now, that the 5 to 9 rep range, 5 to 8 rep range is like, there's no point in going over 8 reps, right? Again, we're at that extreme right now. Yeah. So we're dieting down for my last prep in 2023, and we hit my previous stage weight, and I looked like 15 weeks out at best. And so we're like, what is going on? Because my strength was up. Like I was still training when we posted that side by side. I think it got dismissed as he took a hiatus from training and now he got it back. But no, I was training the entire time. It was just that I had taken things so far that we're running into a potential bottleneck in that some other system may have been limiting my performance. And so that check-in, that was August 15th. And I remember that because I almost pulled out of prep that day. So Chris called me and we were talking about like what could be going on. Because we look back at 21 pictures and it just like it didn't compare. So he comes with me for that next day's training session. We had legs and we throw in, basically the kitchen sink of intensity techniques. And we did this double drop set on leg press and with the goal of accumulating like 30 reps. And the first time that I did that, the swelling in my quads was like too much. And I could tell that I was failing the set before my muscles were completely done. It was like the swelling, the metabolic byproducts, that was literally, stopping the rep. And I still had a lot more. And I was so gassed, like we had to stop for 15 minutes after that set because I just couldn't. I thought I was going to throw up. So I was really, really out of shape as well from a cardiovascular standpoint. So you would think that, okay, well, yeah, that's typical bodybuilder, right? That's not going to have too much carryover. Cardio kills your gains. You probably, keep it within moderation, right? Otherwise, interference effect, which we know now it's not that much of an issue. So that it was like night and day, the difference in size. Like my quads, like after we finished the session, going to the locker room, and immediately it was like, yes, there's my physique. So we're like, all right, we got to do this for every muscle group, and let's see what happens, because it's either this or we pull out of prep. If this works, great, we can continue. If it doesn't, okay, we got to go back to the drawing board. So we do that, not necessarily, a double drop set, 30 reps for every single body part, but the average rep range was brought up for everything. Still had a maintenance dose of, low rep work to keep those adaptations. Then, a drop set here, a drop set there for various muscle groups for isolations, more 20 plus work for like lateral raises, biceps, so on and so forth. So interestingly, that perceived difficulty in those drop sets got easier and easier and easier over that 7-week period. And as it got easier, my volume tolerance went back up. And what was really wild was even my low rep performance started to move again, which it had stopped somewhere in the early part of prep. So it was like, okay, something else was bottlenecking adaptation here, and something else may have been, stopping me from providing an ample stimulus that would cause, the growth that we need to happen, right? So in terms of like direct data, I've thought about this like every day since this whole experience. The chronic data would indicate that, okay, between 5 and 30 reps, maybe even 35 reps, we're going to get an equivocal growth response. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, why go through those 30 rep sets if I don't have to, if I can just do a 5 and be done with it? But now we're starting to see that other systems may, delay adaptation, or not necessarily delay it, but it may impede the amount of, adaptation that occurs. So there was, this isn't directly applicable, but I think it's related. This is entirely theoretical, and I'm speculating 100% here. But there was a study, I think it was Thomas et al. 2022. And essentially what they did was they looked at how does having an aerobic base influence adaptation. And so they had, this was a really cool study. It was a crossover or within subject design. So the subjects performed both conditions. So what they did, they had a 3-week period of longer form endurance training. So they literally only used one leg for this. So they did 45 minutes of cycling 3 times a week, and then followed that up with, the rest of the study being on resistance training.
Mm-hmm.
And the leg that they did that endurance training, they grew better from the same training protocol. And so the authors there, they had claimed that it may have been due to mitochondrial function, capillary function, something along those lines. Again, not to say that it's directly related to what was going on here, but I think that, if you're looking at activity on a spectrum where like endurance training is here, resistance training is here, we might be looking at something that's like this. That gap still exists, but you need to kind of cover that gap to some degree. So yeah, we do that for 7 weeks, and that was the change. It was absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I could feel my clothes start fitting differently. And keep in mind, this was on a contest prep. And so my carbohydrates were very, very low. So this was not a difference of being flat versus full. We were, closing in on an October show, and this was August. So it was like we were deep into it. So yeah, that's been a very interesting experience. And so moving forward, like, okay, we probably need to have at least a minimum amount of variation in our training, maybe even go through phases of higher volume, phases of lower volume.
Yep.
Because the opposite also seemed to be true. When I had gone through that really, really high volume phase, 2020, 2019, my strength was, slowing down. When I had dropped the volume and, intensified, powerlifter term, my strength shot up. My hack squat, and I have pictures of this. My hack squat went from 3 and a 10 to 6 and a 10 from August to November. So it was like, okay, neurological adaptations were probably needed there. I tell my clients, so maybe you might need to upgrade your software, right? You might have the hardware to run it, but you might need to upgrade your software. And so you go through that, and now we're able to provide the adequate stimulus that we need. And so it was like, you could see how this happens on both ends. And so, when you have somebody saying high volume works, high volume's the way to go. It's like, yes. But then you have somebody else, same credentials, saying low volume's the way to go. Yes. And they honestly believe it because they're experiencing something like that, but they haven't stuck with it long enough to know when, we're going to hit the wall again on the other side. And we need to, go back and, create that variation to address these potential bottlenecks. So
at this point, you're kind of trying to progress in multiple different rep ranges. And what would you say is some of your extremes on one side and the other in terms of rep ranges right now that you're working within?
Yeah. So right now the lowest is about 5.
Okay.
I kind of stopped doing 4s, just in 3s, because it was just wrecking me. So 5 seems to be enough to maintain that low rep strength, and then I might go as high as 40 on something. But it's not like 40 straight. It's like, okay, like I did a set of 25 and then dropped and continued.
Yeah. Awesome.
So
that's incredible. I actually went through something very similar back when I was bodybuilding, and it was kind of like my conversion from being a natural pro bodybuilder into the sport of powerlifting. And I just noticed that when I solely focused on powerlifting, running the Shikos and the small lofts, and I did run dog crap for a while. I ran the power hypertrophy adaptive stuff created by Lane. Like, I did all types of different programs, and I always felt like I responded a lot better to the high rep ranges. Now, granted, again, maybe we have to undulate and we say, hey, for this specific training block, we're going to hit this specific range, and then this block, this range, and this block, this range. But when I solely converted to powerlifting, my physique did not look the way it was supposed to look. And then when I kind of created this, almost like this hybrid of what I would do is I would run Shiko, I would run either like a Shiko Smolov base for strength, and then I would incorporate like a very robust high volume shoulder, arm, or even like a quad calf, like the muscles that weren't getting hit, to make sure that they kept their fullness, their roundness, and the things that I was known for in the sport of natural bodybuilding. So I think it's very important if you're following a program and you start to notice that maybe your physique isn't responding the way that it should be, don't get married to a rep range, man. Like explore all of them. I remember back in the day, there was a natural pro bodybuilder. His name was Cleveland Thomas. He actually ended up going on to win his IFBB pro card. And he said that he used to do leg presses in sets of 50 reps, right? And I'm like, leg press sets of 50, that's insane. And then I remember one time I tried it, and the pump, the blood flow, the metabolic byproducts, all that, I just felt like by doing it once a week, my quads were just significantly fuller all the time. Now, I'll also mention where I got the same type of stimulus was when I started to implement HIIT cardio on a spin bike. So you think about the idea of the spin bike, right? You're kind of getting like these little micro, leg press reps in, but it's for like 30 seconds in a row, all out. And my legs always felt way more pumped doing that than they did when I was doing like just specifically Shiko or just specifically working in these rep ranges, where the highest I would go would be like maybe 7-8 reps. I'm doing these really high intensity bouts for specifically quads, hams, calves. And I would see more of a muscular fullness. And I remember when I stopped doing powerlifting and I specifically just began to do more bodybuilding focus, and my physique kind of came back to life. I remember people were asking me, they're like, whoa, what are you doing? Because you look bigger. And I'm like, I just got back to doing what works.
Yep.
Right. Because you would see some of these guys that converted from bodybuilding to powerlifting and they just didn't look the same. Waist looked a little bit blocky. Their quad flare wasn't as big. Their muscle bellies and their delts and everything, and their arms weren't as full and round. You start to question that. And so I think it's very important not to be quote unquote dogmatic or married to a specific range, but date all the rep ranges. You know what I mean? Yep. See how your body looks with 5s and then 10s and 15s and 20s. And I would even say it's not a bad idea to sprinkle in some of these higher volume rep ranges on a routine basis, just to finish the workout out with a pretty aggressive pump.
Yeah, I like to train very similar to how Josh was saying, is, like taking some of those top sets within that rep range closer to, a 5 to 8, something like that. And then maybe a back off set in terms of your load, and then going with some extremely, high rep ranges, getting the best of both worlds there. I was going to ask Joshua, as far as when you first got started, from the very jump, were you one to that was pounding the logbook as far as in terms of tracking your progression, or is that something that to this day, every time you're in the gym, it's beating the logbook?
Yeah. So fortunately, we were required to track our lifts. And
I figured at this point where you're at now.
Yeah. And so like it was just a force of habit, and it was like I felt weird not doing it, because there was a period of time where I wasn't doing it, like when I had first moved down here, and I was like, what? I can't remember for the life of me what I did last time, and I have no idea if I'm doing better. And so it bothered me in a sense. There's pros and cons for sure of having the numbers in front of you, but for the most part, I think for most people, the pros outweigh the cons. But for the most part, it's been since day one.
Is there ever anxiety coming from that, as far as wanting to beat it, and maybe you're at a point in which you're not seeing that progression that you would?
It's it happens quite a lot, but that's kind of how I know that I'm like, okay, I'm where I need to be. If it's like scaring you, and you pull up to the gym and you look at your numbers and you're like, oh, are you kidding me? And you're like, oh, I have to do this, but then you do it because it's like holding you accountable. And because if you didn't have those numbers, you'd probably pull out of the set early.
100%.
That's definitely something I don't think enough people talk about, is like the anxiety and the nervousness that comes along with the strength increase. Like when you got to load up a specific amount of plates on a barbell, or a specific amount of plates on your pendulum squats or your RDLs and your deadlifts, it's like you're supposed to be nervous going into that session, as long as you are kind of teeter-tottering the border of what you're physiologically capable of.
Yep.
You know what I mean? If your goal is to build as much muscle mass as possible. Something I wanted to dive into real quick, because I know that this was a piece of that transformation that you posted. And if you guys haven't seen this, go to Josh's page, look at the before and after. It is a complete night and day difference. His back looks absolutely incredible. You can just tell everywhere. It's almost like his physique just kind of came to life, and it's much fuller everywhere. I wanted to ask you, because you were in a contest preparation, so you guys were getting pretty gnarly on calories, and the idea of carb cycling. I'm going to just, as an example, I'm going to throw this out there because I believe you guys were most likely carb cycling in some capacity, whether it's taking you very low carb to basically kind of starve the fat off, right? And then refeeding you to fill back out and kind of take advantage of that glycogen reabsorption. What were some of the things nutritionally that you guys did to help promote such a round, full look?
Yeah, so you guessed correctly. We were basically at PSMF numbers. My screen just there we go. Okay.
And for those who don't know what that is, that's protein sparing modified fast, correct?
Yeah. Sorry, my screen like froze there for a second. But yeah, we were essentially at just trace carbs for 3 to 4 days straight, and then we would fill up pretty hard on the next 1 to 2 days, and then got right back into it. So nice. We normally would do that like on or the day before my leg sessions, because those were like, if I go into that session, depleted, I'm not going to even come close to matching my numbers.
Definitely.
So yeah, that was kind of how we went about it, and then really just grinded it out on rest days.
Awesome.
But yeah, that was like, it was really helpful for peak week. So we had gotten a really good idea of, okay, what does day 1 look like? What does the morning after day 2 look like, day 3? And so we were able to absolutely nail our peak with, regards to timing the carbs.
Yeah, I remember when you were going through that prep. I remember it was actually more in the off season. I remember because I was training with Chris at LA Fitness. And I'm like, dude, Josh is blowing up. He's like, yeah, man, his upper body responds really, really well. And, you don't see a lot of individuals with such a wide back, wide clavicles in the natural bodybuilding world. And the fact is, like, your body responded really, really well to whatever you were doing. So whatever kind of magic, I guess, you and Chris cooked up over there at the competitive breed lab, it definitely worked. And I'm definitely excited to see you guys both hit the stage later this year. But let me ask this, man. So from a physique enhancement perspective, obviously you had mentioned like the idea of, is it just a calorie restriction, right? Like, is it just a calorie deficit? And when you're looking to really take advantage of all the minutiae details in the world of natural bodybuilding, does it really boil down to just being in a calorie restriction, or do you have to really begin to specifically manipulate water, manipulate sodium, carbohydrates, specifically the nuances inside of it, right? Like, are we talking loading 100 grams of carbs pre-workout? Are we talking 20 to 30, 40 carbs intra? Are we talking, another 100 grams of carbs post-training? How important is peri-workout nutrition, specifically for the natural athlete that's really trying to dig down and get stage lean?
Yeah, it's vital at the last 6 weeks of a contest prep. If you've dug hard enough, it's vital. So on the days that we were digging, we had, technically speaking, 20 carbs that weren't coming from trace vegetables, and that was exclusively had intra workout. And it was like, why drink your calories when you're this deep into it? But it was like, this performance is what we care most about right now, and I can suffer through the rest of it if this means greater performance, which it definitely did. Like, I could feel a difference on that first set in comparison to if I waited and had it later on.
So you're saying you were using intra-workout carbohydrates?
Yeah, it was just
in the form of
just Gatorade.
Just Gatorade. All right.
Yeah, but it made a big difference. especially on those low days. You know, if you're 3 days in, it's like that little bit.
Yeah, I bet. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand this or talk about it enough. But when you are that lean, you're so insulin sensitive that any small amount of glycogen that you can get before you train, it has a dramatic impact on how you attack the workout, right? Like trying to go into the workout not having any glycogen available. Granted, you know, your liver's still going to store some, but actually getting some in, maybe it be from juice or Gatorade or Extros or whatever you want to get it from, that can actually help you to reach that level of still getting a pump. Whereas I remember being very low on carbs, I just almost felt like I couldn't get a pump unless I had those carbs and the sodium in before I would train.
So during your protein sparing, you know, modified fast, as far as during those low days, would your only carbohydrates aside from trace carbohydrates be an intra-workout beverage such as Gatorade? All right. So around 30 grams a day coming from Gatorade, and then the rest, you know, maybe 10 to 20 grams coming from trace throughout the day.
Yep.
Yeah. I've got a quick question for you, and this isn't on our, you know, this isn't necessarily included in the podcast notes, but as you've gotten leaner and leaner and it's kind of gone through the contest preparation phase, would you notice that some individuals' bodies, and obviously you being a very well-known coach now, would you happen to say that some individuals' bodies respond better to almost feeding them up going into the competition versus just really just trying to drive them into the ground with calorie restriction and cardio? Like, because I've always believed that as the leaner somebody gets, you almost want to diet them less.
Yep.
Would you happen to say that you would agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. For the most part, unless we're in a situation like I was in where, you know, we were way behind and it was just dig until the show, that would probably be best. So I always tell my guys, even in a standard fat loss phase, let's just get aggressive right from the get-go and then let that rate of loss slow down as we get leaner. So that's normally how I would like to approach it, because you can, and I'm sure you've seen this, you know, stress can absolutely ruin a diet. And this was another, I haven't actually spoken about this. We were 2 weeks out and I had maintained and progressed my strength for majority of the prep, and I'm like at all-time numbers at 2 weeks out with, you know, going through that diet. My scale weight started to go up, and it got as high as 186. That picture, the side by side, it was 179, right? So this was like, you know, it was day by day, it was like 182, 183, 184. And it was like, oh my gosh, like this has to be stress related because we're pushing such a hard deficit right now. And so Chris was like, okay, we gotta let off the gas. And so I know this sounds terrible, but don't take anything to failure tomorrow. And, you know, just kind of chill in the gym. It felt like I had such a hard time doing it. But we legitimately saw 6 pounds come off overnight. And it was just because we had, you know, stressed the system so much, and you know, we fed up just to drop the stress. But even then, it still came way down. So it was like, okay, we can be too aggressive at the tail end.
So throughout your prep, as well as, you know, in the off season, are you pre-programming in deload weeks, or are you just basing that off of bioresponse?
So I have a general idea. This is something that has evolved over time because I was originally under the assumption that, okay, performance is going to let me know when I need to deload. But that hasn't always been the case. Like I think I've gotten, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, really good at just ignoring the body's cues of like, you know, hey, you're kind of fatigued. Like as athletes, we get really good at just
helping up. I can fight through it.
Yeah. And so we can fight through it and still take progressions, even though it's probably not the best thing to do. So I would run things until I would see a regression in performance. But oftentimes I would hit this breaking point like before that would happen, and I couldn't like even go out and train. My energy was just zapped, and I actually started to get like true overtraining symptoms. So I know, roughly speaking, it's about 6 to 8 weeks on average So I'll, it's the yellow light before the red light at around week 6. And then if I'm feeling good, maybe try week 7. And then, okay, by week 8, I'm going to cut things off.
So as far as a fun question I like to ask, especially for, the listeners always like to hear, as far as what are some of your favorite tools you use in regards to supplementation from a natural standpoint, you have found to be beneficial for you?
Yeah. So creatine, caffeine, those are, the biggest ones for sure. Anything that improves, just your ability to get into a parasympathetic state, like those last, 90 minutes of the day. I think that's seriously overlooked. Talk about taking magnesium, everyone knows about ashwagandha, but they're not just a stress relief supplement, not just to meet nutritional deficiencies. I think that there's something to, getting yourself extremely chilled out, like those last few hours. So anything that helps with that, I think it's a win. So even if it doesn't contribute to performance.
Awesome.
I actually love where a lot of the conversation started to go, and obviously I love the entire conversation, but the idea that more bodybuilders need to be able to pull back when they're feeling and sensing resistance, I think is something that hopefully it comes more into the space. Hopefully more people begin to adopt this type of methodology. I remember implementing things like a diet break in the middle of a contest prep back in 2015. And everybody that I knew was like, why the hell would you do that? There's no science to validate. And I'm like, dude, you're not understanding what's happening. Like, these people are getting freaking striated glutes. Their freaking stress is dropping. They're filling out and they're looking awesome. I'm like, maybe you guys should implement these things. So I'm really happy to hear that, a lot of the stuff that I believe to be very truthful in the realm of physique enhancement, which is stress management, which is knowing when to pull back. And I think the hardest thing for any athlete, especially the hard chargers, because you tell me, you tell Zach, you tell you Josh to go run through a wall, we're going to run through the wall. It just is what it is, right? But actually telling us, don't run through the wall, right? Don't go to failure. Don't take the deficit day. Don't go to the gym and crush yourself. Those are typically the hardest things to program in for a very intense athlete. And so I am happy to hear that a lot more of this is coming. And the fact that your physique transforms so much by just you guys logically looking at it and saying, I think we're pushing too hard. I think the stress is too high. We need to back off. We need to get you out of this more, I guess, sympathetic dominance, and get you back into more of a parasympathetic state. Maybe even let's take some refeeds and then let's get really aggressive. And then let's do maybe 1 high carb day, 2 high carb days, 3 high carb days in a row. So you're refilling properly and then driving, refill, drive, refill, drive. I think there's a lot to be said for that. But I just wanted to say, Josh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And something that I'm going to be doing pretty much for every guest is a rapid fire Q&A at the end of each one, just to keep it fresh, just to keep it interesting. So I've got some rapid fire questions I want to ask you. And I know that you are a very detail oriented person, but I want you to answer these as fast as you can. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, cool, man. So favorite exercise to train your back? Go.
Probably it could sound weird, a neutral grip pull up.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Yeah. Favorite lift to train your chest?
A low incline dumbbell press.
Nice. Favorite lift for quads?
It's a tie between a hack and a pendulum, I'd say.
Favorite, I guess, key area of focus you will be spending a lot of time on over the next year?
I'd love to continue exploring everything that we had spoken about. I have some ideas as to how I want to go about structuring a study that would look at this. So yeah, certainly this.
Very cool, man. And then future plans as a natural bodybuilder?
Well, yeah, I'd like to compete. Pretty much competed every other year since 2019. So I'd like to continue doing that for as long as we can. Maybe not necessarily every other year, just when life allows, but I'd like to continue well on into my 40s, maybe even 50s. Yeah, it's a lifelong sport in my mind.
Very cool, had to place an order of importance: exercise selection or intensity. Which one are you putting above the other?
Ooh, I think It's a slight edge towards intensity, just because you could find like a 9 out of 10 exercise as opposed to a 10 out of 10. And if you're really, really good at sending it, you're probably going to get better results.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people getting way too caught up in these nuances of having the perfect machine and the perfect handle and
the perfect split.
It's just perfect everything, right? It's just like if you learn how to work really hard and train a muscle through a full range of motion, you're going to get a lot of progress. But all right, so here it is. Where can people contact you? Where can they find you? What are some of the recent pieces of work that you were referring to in the beginning? You said you're giving out like some long form content and stuff. Where can people find you, and where can they find more of your work?
Yeah, so primarily Instagram. It's just my name clipped. So Josh T. Brad, that's my handle. I post the lectures or a link to my lectures on stories. We're probably going to put them up on the website at some point. Have something in store for the website in the near future. So right now I just have all the links saved. So pretty much just send them through DMs for now. But yeah, most of it happens on Instagram. And then our website is schoolofgains.com. That's gains with a Z. Those are probably the two best places to reach me.
Awesome, man. Well, on behalf of myself, Coach Zach, and the Educated Dieter, we just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You are the first official guest with the new StreamYard platform. So thank you very much for coming on, talking to us for an hour about everything that you're passionate about. We appreciate you. And for all of the listeners out there, please feel free. Go ahead down below. Leave us a comment on the podcast. Leave us a review. We really appreciate it. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next episode.